deep reverence and adoration Americans felt towards General John J. Pershing is to be understood by just knowing one fact. He was the only living American military officer in history to receive the highest rank, General of the Armies of the United States. To view his historic return to the U.S. and the pride Americans felt in him and the collective accomplishment of winning the Great War is to see an American none of us have ever known, and frankly, most cannot imagine in these times where little is considered sacred. General Pershing had commanded the American Expeditionary Forces in France during World War I. He left the U.S. in June 1917, just months after the U.S. declared war against Germany on April 16, 1917. He left with a staff and entourage of 190. He was given wide latitude by President Wilson because of his proven war record, particularly in Mexico. Secretary of War John Baker told Pershing before he sailed for France, quote, "I shall give you only two orders, one to go and one to return," unquote. Pershing would not return for more than 2 years, and when he did, he had commanded over 2 million men and women. World War I was not called the Great War for no reason. It was mankind's first conflict to be fought on land, sea, and air simultaneously. It was mankind's first technological war, with the widespread use of new and devastating weapons like machine guns, tanks, gas, and airplanes, leading to a level of destruction never seen before. An estimated 1.5 billion artillery shells were reportedly fired on the Western Front during the Great War. A relatively new invention, telephones would allow forward deployed soldiers to report back to headquarters miles away and would allow for orders to speedily go through the system. And what this did was to speed the tempo of war and increase its violence. Looking back, during the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, a cannon averaged about 40 rounds per month. By 1918, French and German cannons fired 450 rounds per day. Machine guns, invented only a few decades earlier, fired 600 bullets per minute with a range of 1,000 yards. A storm of steel met men whose commanders led them over the top. In 1914, the warring parties had only 500 warplanes among them. By the end of the war, Britain alone had 50,000. The U.S. had only 35 trained flyers in 1917. By the war's end, it had cobbled a force together of 2,700 planes. Disease would kill more than battle wounds, particularly the very deadly Spanish flu, spread in Europe by arriving American soldiers. On the positive side, war brought medical advances. Ambulances, antiseptic, and anesthesia, three elements of medicine taken entirely for granted today, emerged from the Great War, where amputations previously were the only recourse. A nitrous oxide oxygen mixed was used for the first time to put patients into sleep, allowing surgeries to be performed without leaving men in a state of shock. The U.S. had been very reluctant to go to war. Willa Cather, the great novelist of the American heartland, and quite coincidentally, a former math student of John Pershing when he was stationed in Nebraska and taught prep school on the side, won the Pulitzer Prize in 1923 for her depiction of the mood that came over many U.S. households and changed their convictions towards the war. But now, in 1919, the Great War was over, with 15 to 22 million deaths, half of them civilians. This photo shows the markers where the soldiers fell. The density of destruction is apparent. And now a great American hero was on the SS Leviathan, a ship that had done its part in the war, now on its last voyage. Pershing's arrival home would be an even greater affair, a grander celebration than his arrival in France, where the war-weary French welcomed the American arrival. "The heart of New York goes out to you," wrote Mayor John F. Hyland in an air letter to General Pershing on September 9, 1919. The letter was dispatched from Manhattan by hydroplane and dropped aboard the SS Leviathan during its final days at sea. The ship was bringing the general home. Celebrations of his arrival, parades and banquets, and for months his name would be on the lips, kissed and unkissed, of millions of Americans who saw in him a spectacular leader that had brought the country safely, relatively speaking when compared to Europe's millions of casualties, through the Great War. Noted American composers penned songs about Pershing, and even Pershing's horse Kidron, a striking dark bay horse, captured the imagination of the American people. And indeed, Pershing had steered a course through the first truly modern industrialized war. He had been up against the mammoth egos of the British and French generals who scoffed at the upstart American. Pershing had a strained relationship with the French and British as he fought successfully to maintain the American army and prohibit the Allies to simply use Americans as cannon fodder in their own ranks. He ensured American units were commanded by Americans, and he had more than proven his skill as a strategist and military leader. Pershing cared for his soldiers. Clara Lewandowski Hoke had been a nurse for 4 years when the U.S. entered World War I. She spent time working in the jaw ward, whose facially disfigured patients were a grim reminder of the war's high-powered weaponry. Later, in 1971, she described Pershing's visit to the hospital where she worked and why his visit was so memorable to her.
One morning, fine-looking gentleman came in the back door of the hospital, I should say, and came right by my ward and came in, talked to the patients, and of course we didn't pay any attention first, and I looked up and I recognized General Pershing, and he went to every patient, talked to them, wanted to know how they were being cared for, and whether there was anything that they wanted that they could have, and he went to every room there. He went to Ruth's rooms. We had 2-3 rooms at the time, and I think Pershing went through every room in that hospital. I remember one head case. He was badly hit mentally, and he'd been asking for lemonade. He just begged everybody for lemonade for days, and of course that's the first thing he hit Pershing with, and Pershing says, "I'll see to it that you get a lemonade." And by golly, before the day was over, they had lemons in that hospital.
Pershing more than deserved the fanfare and kisses, the paper showers and cheers. Pershing had also endured unspeakable personal tragedy. As America's foremost military leader of his time, General John Blackjack Pershing had served in the Indian Wars, the Spanish-American War, the Philippines, and the Mexican Intervention. He got his nickname Blackjack as he had commanded an all-African American unit, the 10th Cavalry, on the American frontier. The nickname actually originated as an insult, but Pershing was so proud of his troops, and it seems Pershing had been destined for greatness. He was a figure straight out of Hollywood's central casting. Tall, handsome, a great head of hair. At the University of Nebraska Cadet Corps in 1892 in Lincoln, Nebraska, Pershing earned a law degree during his 4 years at the university and rebuilt the school's declining military cadet program into one of America's finest. During the Spanish-American War, First Lieutenant Pershing, an 1886 graduate of West Point, served with the African-American 10th Cavalry Regiment in Cuba and distinguished himself in battle, earning a Silver Star and promotion to captain for his bravery. He led troops, filled in for fallen officers, braved enemy fire, and kept his men well supplied. Officers who witnessed his actions were quick to praise. Colonel Baldwin, his regimental commander, who had fought many a battle in the U.S. Civil War, wrote that Pershing was, quote, the coolest and bravest man I ever saw under fire in my life, unquote. But the greatest praise Pershing received came from Brigadier General Leonard Wood, who wrote the Assistant Secretary of War of Pershing's accomplishments. The letter was passed to President McKinley, who wrote on it, quote, appoint to a major if there is a vacancy, unquote. Beginning in 1899, Pershing was stationed in the Philippines for 3.5 years. While there, he led American forces against several tribes, collectively called Moros, who were resisting United States control. The fighting was difficult and flared off and on for several years. During his time in the Philippines, Pershing learned the Moros language and studied their customs, which helped him gain their respect and confidence. One of the tribes even named Pershing a minor noble. During his next assignment in Washington, Captain Pershing met Helen Frances Warren, a recent graduate of Wesley College and daughter of United States Senator Francis E. Warren of Wyoming. The two were married in a wedding attended by President Teddy Roosevelt just days before Pershing shipped out to Tokyo, Japan, where he served as a military attaché and observed the Russo-Japanese War. Captain Pershing's brilliance continued to be recognized. In 1906, he was promoted to Brigadier General, skipping over 862 senior officers. Many within the military gossiped that he was promoted because he was married to a senator's daughter. President Roosevelt, however, had suggested the promotion 3 years earlier, before Pershing had ever met the Warren family. After Japan, Brigadier General Pershing was sent back to the Philippines to command Fort McKinley. During this time, he once again worked with the Moros in the development of a constitution and organization of a local government. In 1913, Pershing successfully led troops to overtake outlaw Moros in the Mount Bagsak campaign, for which he was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal. In January 1914, Pershing took command of the 8th Infantry Brigade at the Presidio of San Francisco. It wasn't long, however, before tensions along the Mexican border forced the 8th Infantry to be transferred to Fort Bliss, Texas. While her husband was away, Ms. Pershing and the 4 children remained at the family's 2-story Victorian house at the Presidio. Tragedy struck on Friday, August 27, 1915, when hot coals spilled from the hearth of the Pershing home and onto the highly waxed floor. The house was quickly consumed by flames. Frances and her 3 daughters, aged 8, 7, and 3, perished in the blaze. Only 5-year-old Warren survived after being rescued by Pershing's longtime African-American orderly. After the funeral, Pershing returned to Texas, filled with grief, and he turned all of his attention to work. Around this time, the Mexican bandit Francisco Pancho Villa was leading raids along the border. President Wilson ordered the army to pursue Villa in Mexico, and General Pershing organized 10,000 men for the expedition, including his old 10th Cavalry Buffalo soldiers. Pershing had secured his place in history. When Pershing set foot on New York soil at the Battery, he was observed to have tears streaming down his cheeks at the sight of the welcoming crowds. The crowds themselves were brimming with enthusiasm. Everyone wanted to get in on the spectacle. A surprise awaited the general at City Hall when a young woman burst past the police lines and kissed him on the cheek. The crowd erupted in cheers. Another woman tried to follow suit, but the general stopped her in her tracks, saying, "Oh, madam, please don't." Meanwhile, stories of kissing and being kissed by Pershing seemed to circulate widely. Perhaps they symbolically represented the city's feeling of love for him. One story told of a woman, Kitty Dalton, who was the kissee. In a New York Times article on September 11, 1919, called "Can He Kiss?", Miss Kitty was asked this question after he reportedly kissed her, a regular American man's smacker, when she presented him with roses. Miss Kitty replied, "I'd say he can," she gushed. "He kissed me full on the lips, and nobody ever kissed me as General Pershing did." Pershing's first full day back in the United States, September 10, 1919, was jam-packed. At the Sheep Meadow in Central Park, he would greet a crowd of 50,000 people, 30,000 of which were school children. Some waited 3 hours just to catch a glimpse of the general. Many believed that the general would and should be the next American president. General Pershing mentored a generation of generals who would later lead the U.S. Army in World War II, including George C. Marshall, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, and George S. Patton. Pershing had 2 grandsons that served in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War. One, Richard Pershing, was a second lieutenant in the 502nd Infantry. He was KIA on February 17, 1968. Pershing became the only soldier in the history of the U.S. Army and only one of 4 in the entire U.S. Armed Forces eligible to wear a medal with his own likeness on it. In 1976, General George Washington was posthumously awarded the rank General of the Armies of the United States, the only other American other than Pershing to have the rank.